The signal came through at 3:47 a.m. Station time. Dr. Lisa Martinez was alone in the communications lab aboard the research station when the computers started beeping. She had been working late again trying to decode old alien broadcasts they had picked up months ago. The coffee was cold and her eyes were tired, but something about this new signal made her sit up straight. It was weak and broken, full of static and strange pauses. Lisa had been studying alien languages for 8 years, ever since Earth made first contact with the galactic community. She knew the sound of desperation when she heard it, even in an alien voice. The signal repeated every 30 minutes. Lisa worked through the night running it through every translation program she had. By dawn, she had the basic meaning. Someone was asking for help. Someone was dying. She called Captain Rodriguez, the station commander. He arrived 20 minutes later with 2 cups of fresh coffee and a worried look on his face. Lisa had never called him this early unless something was very wrong. What do you have? Dr. Rodriguez asked, settling into the chair beside her workstation. Lisa played the signal again. The alien voice sounded like someone trying to talk while crying. The words were in broken galactic standard, the common language most alien species used to communicate with each other, but this species was clearly not used to speaking it. They call themselves the Kafir, Lisa explained, pointing to the translation on her screen. They live somewhere in the Andromeda sector. Their home world is under attack. Rodriguez leaned forward. The Andromeda sector was far away, almost on the other side of the galaxy. Earth had no colonies there, no trade routes, no reason to care what happened in that remote region. Who's attacking them? He asked. Lisa pulled up another screen. Something called the Zephyrian Empire. I've heard that name before. They've been conquering systems for the past 50 years. They're the ones who hit our colonies at New Texas and Haven. Rodriguez's face went dark. New Texas had been his home before he joined the space service. 3,000 colonists had been killed or taken as slaves. The attack had happened so fast that Earth barely had time to send a warning to other human settlements. What exactly are the Kafir asking for? He said. Lisa read from her translation notes. They say they're peaceful farmers. They have no weapons, no military, nothing to fight with. The Zephyrians are bombing their cities and taking their people as slaves. They're asking for sanctuary for their children. She paused and looked at Rodriguez. Captain, they say they heard rumors about humans. They think we might help them, but they don't know much about Earth. They just know we exist. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Lisa had worked with him long enough to recognize his thinking face. He was a good man, but he was also practical. Earth had its own problems. The human colonies were spread thin across dozens of systems, and they were all vulnerable to attack. What are they offering in return? He asked finally. Lisa scrolled through more of the translation. Everything they have, their art, their knowledge of farming, their entire cultural database. They say they're willing to share everything if someone will just save their children. Desperation in the alien message was clear even through the computer translation. These were not warriors asking for military support. There were parents begging someone, anyone, to help their family survive. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. The research station orbited Proxima Centauri, humanity's first real foothold beyond the solar system. From here they could see the lights of 3 human colonies and 2 trading posts. It was a small empire compared to the great powers of the galaxy, but it was growing. "Send the message to Earth Command," he said. "Let Admiral Sullivan decide what to do." Lisa nodded and began preparing the transmission. As she worked, she thought about what she knew of the galactic community. Humans were not well liked by most alien species. Earth was too far from the main trade routes. Human behavior confused and frightened other civilizations. Most aliens came from worlds that were stable and peaceful. They had evolved in environments that rewarded cooperation and calm thinking. Humans came from a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. Earth had ice ages, volcanic explosions, earthquakes, hurricanes, and a dozen other natural disasters that happened regularly. The planet had an unusually large moon that caused extreme tides. It had a magnetic field that shifted and changed, causing the climate to swing from hot to cold without warning. Worst of all, Earth was full of predators. Most alien worlds had a few dangerous animals. Earth had thousands of species that could kill humans, and humans had spent their entire history learning how to kill them back. The result was a species that other aliens found terrifying. Humans were adaptable, aggressive, and creative in ways that made no sense to civilizations that had never had to fight for survival. When the galactic community first encountered Earth, they had immediately quarantined the entire solar system. Deathworld species, the official report had said, recommend minimal contact, but humans had not stayed quarantined. They had built faster ships, established colonies, and forced their way into galactic society through sheer determination. Other species traded with humans because human goods were useful and human mercenaries were effective, but nobody really trusted them. Lisa finished preparing the transmission and sent it on the fastest communication channel. Earth Command maintained the message would reach Earth in about 6 hours. Admiral Sullivan would read it, discuss it with his advisors, and probably decide that the Kafir were too far away and too unimportant to matter. That was the practical decision. Earth had limited resources and many enemies. Getting involved in a war on the other side of the galaxy would be expensive and dangerous. The smart thing to do would be to ignore the message and focus on protecting human colonies. But Lisa had met Admiral Sullivan twice, and she suspected he would not make the practical decision. Sullivan had lost his brother in the New Texas attack. He had a personal hatred for the Zafarian empire that went beyond military strategy. She was right. The response came back in 4 hours, faster than should have been possible. Admiral Sullivan must have made his decision within minutes of reading the message. The reply was short and simple. Dr. Martinez prepared detailed briefing materials on the Cathvar and their situation. Captain Rodriguez, begin immediate preparations to depart for Earth. The research station is being reassigned to special operations. Tell no one outside your senior staff about this message until further notice. Admiral Sullivan. Lisa stared at the message. Special operations meant military action. Earth was going to help the Cafe R. Captain Rodriguez was reading the same message on his own screen. He looked up at Lisa. With a grim smile, "Doctor, I think you just started a war," he said. Lisa thought about the desperate voice in the alien transmission. Somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, parents were watching their children die while an empire built on conquest and slavery destroyed everything they had ever known. Those parents had sent a message into the void, hoping that someone somewhere would care enough to help. They had asked for help from monsters. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. The galaxy had rules about interfering in other species' wars. There were treaties, regulations, and diplomatic protocols that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of situation. And GT, but humans had never been very good at following other people's rules. Earth was about to remind the galaxy why most species were afraid of humans. The Kether had called for help, and the monsters were coming. Captain Ryan Brooks was drinking beer in a bar on Luna Station when his communicator started buzzing. He ignored it at first. After 3 months of patrol duty in the outer colonies, he had earned the right to get drunk in peace. Made him look at the screen. The third buzz made him stand up and walk outside. The message was coded Priority 1, eyes only. And GT. Brooks had only seen that classification twice in his 15-year career. Both times had meant people were going to die. He read the message 3 times before he believed it. Admiral Sullivan wanted him to report to Earth Command within 24 hours. His ship, the UES Reaper, was being reassigned to special operations. Brooks was authorized to recruit additional crew from any source he deemed necessary. The last line made him smile for the first time in weeks. No questions asked about their backgrounds or previous affiliations. Brooks finished his beer and started making calls. 2 hours later, he was aboard the Reaper talking to his senior staff. Chief Engineer Martinez was a former convict who had learned to build engines in military prison. Lieutenant Foster had been kicked out of regular service for fighting, but she was the best pilot Brooks had ever seen. Sergeant Miller had served with 3 different mercenary groups before joining the crew. They were not the kind of people who usually served on regular military ships. "What's the mission?" Martinez asked. She was a small woman with scars on her hands and a suspicious look in her eyes. She had been asking that question for 3 months, ever since they had been assigned to patrol duty instead of combat operations. Brooks showed them the partial briefing he had received. Rescue mission: alien civilians under attack by the Zeparian Empire. Long-range deep space operation. Foster whistled softly. "The Zeparians, those are the bastards who hit New Texas." Miller nodded grimly. "How many ships are we taking?" "Don't know yet," Brooks said. "But Admiral Sullivan is calling in volunteers from every military branch, plus private contractors, mercenary groups, and anyone else who wants to fight." The 3 of them looked at each other. They'd all lost friends or family to alien attacks. The chance to hit back at one of the species responsible was something they had been waiting for. Meanwhile, on Earth, Commander Kate Robinson was having the strangest morning of her military career. She had been called to Earth Command at dawn and given an assignment that seemed impossible. Admiral Sullivan wanted her to assemble a joint task force using volunteers from every military service, plus civilians with useful skills. How many people are we talking about, sir? She asked. Admiral. Sullivan looked tired. He'd been working all night reading reports about the Keth situation and planning humanities. Response, as many as volunteer. I want every ship that can make the journey, every soldier who wants to fight, and every civilian who can help with evacuation and relief work. Robinson stared at him. Sir, that could be hundreds of thousands of people. We don't have the resources to support an operation that size. Sullivan smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Commander, I'm not asking you to supply them. I'm asking you to organize them. Anyone who volunteers provides their own equipment, their own supplies, and their own transportation. We're just going to point them in the right direction. 3 hours later, Robinson was standing in front of cameras broadcasting to every human colony and military base. The message she read was simple and direct. Alien children are dying. A peaceful species called the Kathur is being destroyed by the same empire that attacked our colonies. They asked for help. We're going to give it to them. Anyone who wants to volunteer should report to their local military recruitment office. We need soldiers, pilots, engineers, medics, teachers, and anyone else who can help save lives. The response was immediate and overwhelming. At Mars Colony, retired Marine Colonel Steve Adams was watching the broadcast. With his wife, he had been out of active service for 5 years, running a small mining operation, but he remembered the reports from New Texas, the images of human families killed by Zephyrian raiders. He kissed his wife goodbye and drove to the recruitment office on Titan Station. Dr. Kevin White was finishing his research on alien biology when the message came through. He had spent years studying captured Zephyrian specimens, learning about their strengths and weaknesses. He packed his research and caught the next transport to Earth. In the asteroid belt, Captain Lisa Chen was commanding a patrol ship when she received new orders. Her entire squadron was being reassigned to the volunteer task force. Chen had grown up on Haven Colony before the Zephyrian attack. She still had nightmares about watching the evacuation ships leave without her younger brother. But it wasn't just military personnel who volunteered. Engineers from the Mars terraforming project signed up to help build refugee camps. Teachers from the outer colonies volunteered to work with alien children. Even families with no military experience applied to help with evacuation and relief efforts. The most surprising volunteers came from the criminal underworld. Tony Ritchie had been running smuggling operations in the outer systems for 20 years. He hated aliens, hated the government, and especially hated military officers. But when he heard that human civilians were volunteering to help alien children, something changed in his mind. He walked into the recruitment office on Siri Station and offered his entire organization 12 fast ships, experienced crews who knew how to avoid detection and contacts throughout the galaxy, who could provide intelligence and supplies. Why? Asked the recruitment officer. Ritchie shrugged. Because even scum like me has limits, and killing kids crosses the line. Within a week, Earth Command was coordinating the largest volunteer military operation in human history. Regular military units were joining forces with mercenary companies, private security firms, and criminal organizations. The diversity of the force created logistical nightmares, but it also created something unprecedented. Admiral Sullivan reviewed the reports from Commander Robinson with amazement. They had more volunteers than they could transport. Ships were arriving from every human colony carrying soldiers who had paid their own way to join the fight. Corporate executives were funding entire military units. Crime bosses were contributing ships and weapons. What's driving this? Sullivan asked. Robinson showed him a compilation of interview footage from volunteers. The same themes appeared over and over: revenge for attacks on human colonies, outrage at the idea of children being killed, and something else, something uniquely human that other species found hard to understand. They want to prove something, Robinson explained. Every species in the galaxy thinks we're monsters. They have a chance to be monsters for the right reason. Dr. White arrived on Earth carrying data files that made Admiral Sullivan smile. The Zephyrians were big, heavily armored, and slow. They relied on energy weapons. In overwhelming numbers, their ships were designed to fight other Zephyrians, species that followed predictable tactical patterns. They've never fought humans, White explained. They don't understand how we think. They expect linear battle plans, formal challenges, and predictable responses. They're not ready for guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, or creative use of environment. Lieutenant Amy Foster was monitoring alien communications from her station aboard the Reaper, the Zephyrian. Commanders were aware that human ships were moving toward Keth, but they were not worried. Their intelligence reports described humans as minor predators and primitive scavengers. One intercepted message made Foster laugh out loud. A Zephyrian admiral was telling his subordinates that humans were barely more dangerous than the Keth. For themselves, she forwarded the message to Admiral Sullivan with a note. Sir, I think they're about to get a very unpleasant surprise. Human fleet was assembling at the edge of known space, far from any alien observation posts. Military vessel, civilian ships, converted for combat, and vessels that officially didn't exist were gathering for the longest military operation in human history. Captain Brooks stood on the bridge of the Reaper, looking at the display showing friendly contacts. There were more ships than he had ever seen in one place. Each one carried people who had volunteered to travel across the galaxy to help strangers they had never met. Sir, said Lieutenant Foster, we're receiving final departure coordinates from Earth's command. Brooks nodded. Signal the fleet. All ships prepare for jump to hyperspace. The monsters were coming. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Keth system and saw Hell. Captain Ryan Brooks stood on the bridge of the Reaper, staring at the tactical display with growing anger. 12 Zephyrian battleships surrounded the blue-green planet below. Smaller ships moved back and forth like insects carrying cargo from the surface to massive slave transport vessels. Even from this distance, they could see the fires burning across entire continents. My God, whispered Lieutenant Foster. They're not even trying to preserve anything. The planet that should have been home to millions of peaceful farmers was dying. Orbital bombardment had turned fertile valleys into smoking craters. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were nothing but rubble. The Zephyrians were not conquering the Kafir world, they were destroying it. Admiral Sullivan's voice came through the communication system. Calm and cold. All ships, this is Earth. Command. You are seeing what the Zephyrian Empire calls conquest. They have been doing this to innocent species for 50 years. Today it stops. Brooks opened a channel to all human ships. Fleet had grown. During the journey, more volunteers had joined them at every stop until they had nearly 400 vessels of every size and type. Military destroyers flew alongside. Converted cargo haulers, corporate security ships traveled next to vessels that had been built by criminal organization. Zephyrian forces. Brooks transmitted on all frequencies. This is the Terran Expeditionary Force. You have 30 seconds to cease fire and withdraw from this system. Response came quickly. Admiral Korak, commander of the Zephyrian fleet, laughed so hard that his translator had trouble keeping up with the sound. Humans, the galaxy's favorite pets, have come to play. War, how amusing. Kor had conquered 47 worlds. He had destroyed civilizations that had existed for millennia. His ships carried the most advanced weapons in the known galaxy, and his soldiers were veterans of hundreds of battles. These primitive creatures from their isolated corner of space were nothing more than an interesting distraction. Little humans, Kor continued, you are far from home. Turn around and crawl back to your pathetic colonies before I decide to add Earth to my list of conquered worlds. Brooks looked at his tactical officer. How long until we're in weapons range? 15 minutes, sir. Signal all ships. Attack pattern Gamma. Remember, we're not here to fight fair. What happened next would be studied in militarisms for decades. The human attack did not follow any pattern the Zephyrians had seen before. Instead of forming battle lines and exchanging fire with the larger ships, the human fleet scattered in every direction. Small, fast ships that had been hidden among the asteroids suddenly appeared, launching missiles at Zephyrian supply vessel. Converted civilian ships began jamming communications, while military vessels targeted command and control centers. The Zephyrians had prepared for a traditional space battle. They were not prepared for 400 ships attacking from every possible direction, using tactics that seemed to have no logic or pattern. Captain Lisa Chen commanded a squadron of modified cargo ships that had been fitted with missile launchers by criminal engineers. Her ships looked like harmless transport vessels until they opened fire. Zephyrians did not consider them threats until it was too late. Target their engines, Chen ordered. Dead ships can't run away. Her squadron hit 3 Zephyrian destroyers before the enemy even realized they were under attack. Alien ships had powerful shields and heavy armor, but they were designed to stop energy weapons fired from the front. Chen's missiles came from below, hitting weak points that Zephyrian engineers had never considered vulnerable. Meanwhile, Sergeant Danny Miller was leading the first boarding operation of his career. His transport ship, a modified mining vessel, clamped onto the hull of a Zephyrian troop carrier and began cutting through the armor with industrial tools. Remember, Miller told his team as they prepared to board, these things are big, slow, and used to fighting in straight lines. We're small, fast, and angry. Use that. The Zephyrian ship had been designed to transport troops, not to repel boarders. The corridors were wide and straight, perfect for moving large numbers of soldiers quickly. They were not designed for the kind of close combat that humans had been perfecting for thousands of years. Miller's team moved through the ship like a plague. They used explosives to seal off sections, kinetic weapons that worked regardless of alien armor, and tactics that the Zephyrians had never encountered. Within 20 minutes they had captured the entire vessel and freed Cathvar slaves on the planet's surface. Major Bob Wilson was coordinating with surviving Cathar resistance fighters. The aliens were gentle herbivores who had never imagined they would need to fight for their lives. They had been hiding in caves and ruins, watching their world die around them. Wilson found them in an underground shelter beneath what had once been a farming community. There were maybe 200 of them, mostly elderly adults and young children. They looked at the human soldiers with a mixture of hope and fear. "We heard the fighting in space," said their leader, an old Keth named Velter. "Are you really here to help us?" Wilson looked at the alien families huddled in the darkness. The children were thin from hunger, and many of the adults were injured. These were the people the Zephyrians considered worth only as slaves or target practice. "Yes," Wilson said simply, "we're here to help." What happened next amazed the Kafir. The humans did not just fight the Zaparian ground forces. They taught the Kether how to fight back. Farming tools became weapons, irrigation systems became booby traps, seed storage facilities became ammunition depots. Your people built this world to support life, Wilson explained to. "We're going to show you how to use that against the ones trying to destroy it," Keth learned quickly. Within hours they were sabotaging Zephyrian supply lines, disrupting communications, and rescuing their own people from slave camps. The peaceful farmers discovered that they had been preparing for war their entire lives. Without knowing it, they just needed someone to show them how. In space, dear Korak was beginning to realize that his fleet was in serious trouble. His battleships were powerful enough to destroy any human vessel in single combat, but the humans refused to fight single combats. They attacked in groups from unexpected directions, using weapons and tactics that made no sense. "How are they doing this?" demanded from his flagship's bridge. His tactical officer was staring at the displays with confusion. "Sir, they're not following any known battle doctrine. Their ships are attacking targets that don't matter, avoiding fights they should win, and coordinating in ways that our computers cannot predict." Kor watched as two more of his ships went dark. The humans had somehow managed to disable their engines without destroying them completely. The vessels were stranded but intact, their crews alive but helpless. "They're not trying to kill us," the tactical officer said suddenly. "They're trying to capture us." The realization hit Kor like a physical blow. The humans were not just fighting to defend the Kathur, they were fighting to take prisoners, gather intelligence, and capture ships. This was not a rescue mission, it was a hunting expedition. For the first time in 40 years of military service, Admiral Korak felt afraid. His empire had rules about how civilized species conducted war. There were protocols, traditions, and limits that everyone understood, but these humans seemed to have never heard of such things. They fought like the universe was trying to kill them because it had been. They adapted like survival was more important than honor because it was. They showed mercy to innocents and ruthlessness to enemies because they had learned the difference between the two the hard way. The galaxy had always wondered why humans were quarantined on their isolated world, Now Core understood it was not to protect the galaxy from humans, it was to protect the galaxy from what humans became when they had a good reason to fight. Monsters had arrived and they were just getting started. The news of the battle at Keth spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Ambassador Helen Price sat in her office on Earth, watching the communication channels light up with messages from dozens of alien governments. Every species in the galactic community wanted to know the same thing. What exactly were humans doing? The first reports had seemed impossible. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered almost 50 worlds without serious resistance, was being systematically destroyed by creatures from a planet most civilized species had never heard of. The official reports called it impossible. Unofficial reports called it terrifying. Price's assistant, Lieutenant Mark Stevens, brought her the latest intelligence summary. Ma'am, we're getting calls from everyone. Vor Confederacy wants to know if we're planning to expand into their territory. The Trade Guild is asking if they can hire human mercenaries. And the Galactic Council is demanding that we explain our actions. Price laughed, but there was no humor in it. For 50 years, the galactic community had treated humans like dangerous animals that should be kept in cages. Now that those same animals had proven useful, everyone wanted to talk. What's our official position? Stevens asked. Our official position, Price said, is that we responded to distress call from a peaceful species under attack. Everything else is just the consequences of that decision. Meanwhile, in the Keth system, Colonel Steve Adams was conducting the most important interrogation of his career. Admiral Corfex sat in a small room aboard the captured Zephyrian flagship, his hands bound with restraints designed for much larger beings. Proud conqueror of 47 worlds, looked small and broken. Adams had fought in 3 different wars before volunteering for this mission. He had interrogated enemy prisoners before, but never with this much at stake. Information coursed could save thousands of lives and prevent future attacks on human colonies. Tell me about your Empire's command structure, Adams said. Calmly, Core lifted his massive head. Even defeated, he still carried himself like a military officer. I will tell you nothing primitive. Kill me if you wish, but I will not betray my people. Adams nodded as if he had expected that answer. He activated a recording device and set it on the table between them. Admiral, I want you to understand something about humans before we continue. We don't just fight wars, we end them permanently. Recording was being broadcast on all Zephyrian military frequencies. Adams wanted every Zephyrian commander in the galaxy to hear what came next. Your Empire has spent 50 years conquering peaceful species, Adams continued. You've killed millions of innocent people and enslaved millions more. You thought you were strong because you picked fights with farmers and artists. Korax's eyes showed the first hint of uncertainty. This human was not asking for information. He was making a statement. Now you've encountered humans, Adams said, were the species that spent 1,000,000 years learning how to kill everything on our planet, including each other. We're the species that turned warfare into an art form before we even learned to build cities, and you made us angry. The recording devices captured every word as Adams explained human military doctrine. He talked about total war, asymmetric tactics, and the human ability to turn any environment into a weapon. He described how human soldiers had been trained to fight in every possible condition, from Arctic cold to desert heat to the vacuum of space. Your people fight to conquer, Adam said. That's business, but you made this personal when you started killing civilians. Humans don't just fight wars. When something becomes personal, we erase the problem. The broadcast had its intended effect. Within hours, Zephyrin commanders across the galaxy were receiving reports from their own subordinates. Entire fleets were requesting permission to surrender rather than face the species that had turned their greatest admiral into a broken prisoner in less than 2 days. Dr. Kevin White was analyzing the psychological impact from his temporary laboratory aboard the Reaper. He'd been studying alien behavior for years, but he had never seen anything like the Zephyrian response to human tactics. They're not just afraid, he explained to Admiral Sullivan over the communication link. They're confused. Their entire understanding of warfare is based on predictable patterns. Species fight until one side has more casualties than they can accept, then the losing side surrenders, but humans don't fight that way. Sullivan nodded. He was reviewing reports from across the galaxy, watching as the Zephyrian Empire collapsed faster than anyone had thought possible. What do you mean we don't accept casualties is inevitable? White said. Every human soldier is trained to think, adapt, and improvise. When a human unit takes casualties, they don't retreat. They get angry and find a new way to attack. The Zephyrians don't understand that the psychological warfare was working better than anyone had expected. Admiral Sullivan was receiving surrender offers from Zephyrian commanders who had never even seen a human ship. The mere knowledge that humans were involved in the war was enough to convince many alien officers that continued resistance was hopeless. But the most important effect was happening in neutral space. Dr. Lisa Martinez was monitoring communications between various galactic powers, and the conversations were revealing how much the balance of power had shifted. The Galactic Council is meeting emergency session, she reported to Earth Command. They're trying to decide how to respond to what they're calling the human intervention. The intercepted messages showed that most alien species were more afraid of humans than they had been of the Zephyrians. The Zephyrian Empire had been predictable. They conquered worlds, enslaved populations, and moved on to the next target. It was evil, but it was understandable evil. Humans were different. They had traveled across the galaxy to help complete strangers, fought a war using tactics that made no sense to civilized species, and won so decisively that an empire was collapsing. The aliens couldn't understand why humans had done it, and that made them afraid of what humans might do next. Captain Brooks was reviewing the tactical reports when Lieutenant Foster brought him the strangest message of the war. It was from the Peaceful Commerce Alliance, a group of merchant species that had been paying tribute to the Zephyrian Empire for 20 years. Sir Foster said they're asking if we want to buy information about Zephyrian military installations. They're offering to provide intelligence about every enemy base in their territory. Brooks stared at the message. They want to pay us to destroy their oppressors. Apparently, sir, they say they've been waiting for someone strong enough to fight the Zephyrians. Now that they know humans exist, they want to hire us. Similar offers were coming from across the galaxy, species that had been conquered or threatened by the Zephyrian Empire. Suddenly eager to ally with Earth, they offered trade agreements, military cooperation, and information in exchange for human protection. The most surprising offer came from the neutral zones, areas of space that no major power controlled. Pirate organizations, independent traders, and refugee communities were all asking for the same thing. Would Earth be willing to establish a presence in their regions? They want us to be the galaxy's police force, Ambassador Price realized as she read the reports. They've decided that having humans as neighbors is better than having no protection at all. Admiral Sullivan was facing the strangest problem of his military career. Earth had won the war, but now they had to decide what to do with victory. The Zephyrian Empire was collapsing, but that left a power vacuum. Across dozens of star systems, millions of former slaves needed help, refugee populations needed food and shelter, and every species in the galaxy was looking to Earth for leadership. We came here to rescue one species, Sullivan told his staff during their morning briefing. Now half the galaxy wants us to rescue them too. The transformation was happening faster than anyone had expected. Earth's reputation as dangerous predators was becoming Earth's reputation as dangerous protectors. Species that had once avoided human space were now asking for permission to establish embassies on Earth. But the most important change was happening among humans themselves. The volunteers who had come to save the Kafir were discovering that they liked being heroes. They liked the idea that their reputation as monsters could be used to protect the innocent. Captain Brooks stood on his bridge, looking at a star map that showed human ships scattered across a quarter of the galaxy. They were escorting refugee convoys, hunting down Zephyrian holdouts, establishing supply bases for continued operations. Sir, Lieutenant Foster said, we're receiving a message from Earth Command. Admiral Sullivan wants to know if we're ready for the next phase of operations. Brooks smiled. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about humans. When innocent people called for help, the monsters would answer. Once the monsters arrived, they didn't go home until the job was finished. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the Battle of Kafir, Admiral Jake Sullivan stood in his office aboard the Orbital Command Station, reading reports that would have seemed like science fiction just a year ago. The Zephyrian Empire was gone. And GT, I've defeated. And GT, not reduced but completely eliminated as a military force. 47 conquered worlds were free, and millions of former slaves were being resettled on their home planets. But the most surprising report was sitting on his desk right now. It was a request from the Galactic Council for Earth to establish permanent peacekeeping forces in 12 different star systems. The same council that had quarantined humanity 50 years ago was now begging for human protection. His aide, Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes, brought him another stack of messages. Sir, the refugee resettlement is ahead of schedule. Kafir delegation is ready to depart for Earth whenever you give permission. Sullivan nodded. The Kathur had insisted on sending representatives to thank Earth personally despite the long journey. Their home world was being rebuilt with help from human engineers, but they wanted to see the planet that had produced the species that saved them. What about the former Zephyrian territories? Sullivan asked. Most of them have established democratic governments, Hayes reported. You're all asking for trade agreements with Earth, and sir, we've received formal applications from 18 species requesting to join a human-led alliance. Sullivan shook his head in amazement. When this had started, Earth's goal had been simple: save the Kafir and punish the Zephyrians for attacking human colonies. Nobody had planned to become the galaxy's dominant military power on Earth. Ambassador Helen Price was preparing for the arrival of the largest diplomatic delegation in human history. Representatives from 43 different species were coming to establish formal relations with Earth. The old quarantine was not just lifted, it was completely forgotten. Ma'am, her assistant said, the Vorthach Confederacy is asking if we would consider establishing military academy on their home world. They want to learn human tactics. Price laughed. The Vorth were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had ships that could travel between stars in days instead of weeks, computers that could predict weather patterns centuries in advance, and medical technology that could cure diseases humans had never heard of. But they wanted to learn how to fight from the species they had once called primitive savages. Tell them we'll consider it, Price said, but remind them that human military training is not for the weak. The real proof of how much had changed came from an unexpected source. Captain Ryan Brooks was in the former Zephyrian capital system, overseeing the dismantling of their last military bases, when he received a message that made him stop and read it 3 times. It was from a pirate organization in the Outer Rim. They were offering to surrender their entire fleet and join Earth's peacekeeping forces. The message was signed by Tony Ritchie. It's the same smuggler who had volunteered his criminal organization to help save the Kafir. Captain Lieutenant Foster said, we're receiving similar offers from 7 other pirate groups, as they all want to become legitimate under Earth's protection. Brooks thought about the irony. The galaxy's criminals wanted to become cops as long as humans were running the police force. It made sense. In a strange way, pirates and smugglers understood the kind of thinking that had made humans so effective in combat. They recognized the value of unpredictable tactics and creative problem solving. Tell them we'll review their applications, Brooks said, but make it clear that working for Earth means following Earth's rules. No more raiding civilian ships. The transformation was not limited to space. On the Keth for home world, Major Bob Wilson was watching something that nobody had expected. The peaceful herbivores who had been nearly extinct 6 months ago were becoming farmers again, but they were also becoming something else. They were becoming teachers, core agricultural experts working with refugees from a dozen different worlds, teaching them how to grow food in harsh conditions. The irrigation systems that humans had helped them turn into weapons were being converted back to farming tools, but the knowledge remained. The Kether now understood that sometimes gentle people needed to be ready to fight. Major, said Velter the old Kether, who had become their unofficial leader, we have received a request from the Peaceful Commerce Alliance. They Want us to help them establish defensive militias on their worlds. Wilson smiled. The galaxy's most peaceful species was being asked to teach other peaceful species how to defend themselves. Kethfer were discovering that their experience with humans had given them knowledge that other species desperately needed. What did you tell them? Wilson asked. We told them yes, Belter said. But we also told them that they would need to be ready to fight like humans if they wanted to survive like humans. The most important changes were happening on Earth itself. Dr. Kevin White was studying the psychological effects of the war on human society, and his findings were surprising. Instead of becoming more militaristic, humans were becoming more protective. The knowledge that they were the galaxy's strongest military force was making them more careful about how they use that strength. We're seeing increased volunteerism for humanitarian missions, White reported to the government committee overseeing galactic relations. People who fought in the Kefir operation are signing up for refugee relief, medical missions, and educational programs. The volunteers who had gone to war were coming home with a new understanding of their place in the galaxy. They had seen what happened when strong species bullied weak ones, and they were determined to prevent it from happening again. Dr. Lisa Martinez was working on the most ambitious project of her career. Earth was establishing a translation and communication center that would serve the entire galaxy. Species that had never been able to talk to each other were suddenly able to communicate through human intermediaries. We're becoming the galaxy's diplomats. By accident, Martinez explained to Admiral Sullivan during one of their regular briefings. Species trust us to translate fairly because they know we're strong enough that we don't need to cheat. The irony was not lost on anyone. The species that had been quarantined for being too dangerous was now serving as the neutral mediator for galactic disputes. But the real test of Earth's new position came when the Galactic Council voted to offer humanity permanent membership as a leading power. The vote was unanimous, something that had never happened before in the Council's history. Ambassador Price read the formal invitation to a joint session of Earth's government. The Galactic Council recognizes Earth as a major power and invites humanity to take a permanent seat on the ruling committee. Recognition of Earth's service to galactic peace. Humans would be granted authority over military matters and dispute resolution. The debate that followed lasted for weeks. Some people argued that Earth should reject the offer and focus on its own colonies. Others believed that humanity had a responsibility to use its strength to protect weaker species. The decision was made when the Kefir delegation finally arrived on Earth. Belter spoke to the United Nations Assembly. His words translated into every human language. 6 months ago, we sent a message into the void, he said. We were dying and we called for help from anyone who would listen. We had heard rumors of a species called humans, but we knew nothing about you except that you existed. Belter paused, looking around the assembly hall, filled with representatives from every nation on Earth. We thought we were calling for help from strangers. We discovered we were calling for help from family. Came across the galaxy to save people you had never met, fought enemies you had no reason to hate, asked for nothing in return except the chance to do what was right. The old alien's voice carried clearly through the translation system. The galaxy calls you monsters, and perhaps you are, but you are monsters who choose to protect the innocent instead of consuming them. You are predators who hunt evil instead of prey. He gestured to the humans around him. We offer you this wisdom from our ancient culture. The greatest strength is not the power to destroy, but the wisdom to know when destruction is necessary and when it is not. The vote was unanimous. Earth accepted its position as a galactic power. Admiral Sullivan stood on the observation deck of his station, looking out at a star map that showed the new reality. Human ships patrolled trade routes, protected refugee convoys, and maintained peace in regions that had known only war for generations. The monsters of Earth had become the galaxy's guardians. His communication system chimed with an incoming message. It was from a species he had never heard of, located in a distant part of the galaxy. The message was simple and familiar. Help us, please. Anyone who can hear this, we are dying. Sullivan smiled and began issuing orders. The monsters were ready to answer another call.